Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Bloodlines. Dominic Frost never believed in fairy tales. Life had taught him early that power and control were the only constants worth trusting. As the heir to the Frost construction empire, he'd built his reputation on calculated precision and unwavering resolve, qualities that made him feared in boardrooms across Boston. His marriage to Vivian Hargrove, daughter of his father's longtime rival, had been positioned as a merger more than a union of hearts, though Dominic had genuinely grown to love her over their 15 years together. Their mansion in Beacon Hill stood as a monument to success, housing their 2 children, Leo, a quiet, observant 10-year-old who inherited his father's analytical mind, and Audrey, their 14-year-old daughter who had her mother's beauty and, unfortunately, her growing sense of entitlement. The first fracture appeared 3 years ago when Dominic found a text message on Vivian's phone from Ryland Astor, a charismatic real estate developer who had recently moved to Boston from Seattle. Dominic didn't confront her. That wasn't his style. Instead, he began documenting, watching, and waiting. When you've spent a lifetime building empires, you learn that timing is everything. "Dad, can we go fishing this weekend?" Leo asked one evening as Dominic reviewed blueprints in his study. Dominic looked up at his son, whose eyes held a wisdom beyond his years. "Not this weekend, Leo. There's something I need to handle." "Is it about Mom and Mr. Astor?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Dominic's expression didn't change, but internally, he reassessed his son. "What do you know about Mr. Astor?" "I hear things," Leo said, fidgeting with the corner of the blueprint. "And I see things. Mom's different when she's talking to him on the phone." Dominic nodded slowly. "Some battles need to be fought silently, son. Remember that." That night, Dominic followed Vivian's Lexus to a boutique hotel downtown. He watched from his Bentley as Ryland greeted her at the entrance, his hand lingering too long on the small of her back. Dominic didn't feel rage. He felt something colder, more precise. He took photographs, made notes in his leather-bound journal, and drove home. For 8 months, he collected evidence. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, screenshots of text messages obtained from their cellular provider. Being on the board had its advantages. He learned that Ryland was orchestrating a bid to take over 3 key Frost construction projects, using information Vivian had been feeding him. When the divorce papers were filed, Vivian was stunned. Her legal team, unprepared for the mountain of evidence Dominic presented, advised her to settle. She received a modest payout, enough to maintain appearances, but nowhere near the fortune she'd expected. The judge, impressed by Dominic's meticulous documentation and disturbed by Vivian's corporate espionage, awarded him primary custody of both children. "You'll regret this," Vivian had hissed outside the courtroom. "You have no idea what's coming for you." Dominic had simply straightened his tie. "I always know what's coming, Vivian. That's why I win." 6 months after the divorce, Vivian announced her engagement to Ryland Astor. Dominic received the wedding invitation with a handwritten note. "Family should be present for life's milestone moments. The children expect you to be civil." Anyone who truly knew Dominic Frost would have recognized the invitation for what it was, not an olive branch, but a declaration of war. Chapter 2, The Gathering Storm. The Astor-Hargrove wedding was set for early June at the prestigious Whitebridge Country Club, a venue that had a 2-year waiting list unless you had connections that Dominic had purposely severed for Vivian during the divorce proceedings. Somehow, Ryland had secured it anyway, a detail that didn't escape Dominic's notice. "I'm not going to Mom's wedding," Audrey declared over breakfast 3 weeks before the event, surprising both Dominic and Leo. Since the divorce, she had aligned herself firmly with her mother, blaming Dominic for the family's fracture despite the evidence of Vivian's betrayal. "Why the change of heart?" Dominic asked, setting down his coffee. Audrey twisted a strand of her dark hair, a habit she shared with Vivian. "I overheard her talking to Ryland about my trust fund, the one Grandpa Frost set up for me. She was asking how they could access it early." Dominic nodded, unsurprised. Malcolm Frost had established trust funds for both grandchildren, accessible only at age 25 or for education approved by the trustee, Dominic himself. "And what did Mr. Astor say?" Dominic inquired, his tone neutral despite the spark of interest. "That once they were married, they could pressure you to release the funds. That you'd do anything to keep the peace for us kids." Audrey's voice hardened. "He called you weak, Dad. Said you were all calculation and no backbone. Leo, quietly eating his cereal, looked up at his father. Their eyes met in silent understanding. People often mistake patience for weakness, Dominic replied. It's a useful misconception. That evening, Dominic received a call from Bennett Hargrove, Vivian's father and his former father-in-law. Dominic, we need to talk, the older man said, his voice gravelly from decades of cigars and whiskey. Not over the phone. The usual place, tomorrow noon. The usual place was a private room at Hudson's Steakhouse where Boston's elite conducted business away from prying eyes. Bennett was already seated when Dominic arrived, looking older than his 70 years. You look like hell, Bennett, Dominic remarked, taking the chair opposite him. Cancer, Bennett replied bluntly. Pancreatic. 6 months, maybe less. Dominic absorbed this with a slight nod. Despite the business rivalry and the divorce, he'd always respected Bennett's straightforward nature. I assume you didn't invite me here for sympathy. Bennett snorted. Hardly. I'm here because of Ryland Astor. The man's a snake, Dominic. Worse than either of us ever were, even in our prime. I'm aware of his character deficiencies. No, you're not. Bennett pushed a folder across the table. Vivian's too blinded by whatever spell he's cast to see it, but Astor's been systematically targeting families like ours. He marries into wealth, drains accounts, and disappears. 3 times before, different states, different names. Dominic opened the folder to find surveillance photos, financial records, and court documents. You've been busy. Dying focuses the mind, Bennett replied. I've made many mistakes, but I won't let my daughter and grandchildren be victimized by this predator. Why come to me? Vivian won't listen to you. Tried. She accused me of trying to control her life, just like you did. Bennett leaned forward. The wedding is a trap, Dominic. Not just for Vivian, but for you. Astor knows you control the family assets. The wedding invitation? It's bait. What exactly are you proposing? Dominic asked, though he already had several scenarios mapping in his mind. You've always been 3 steps ahead of everyone, Bennett said with grudging admiration. I don't know what you'll do, and I don't want to know. But whatever it is, I want Astor destroyed. Not just stopped, erased. And Vivian? Bennett's eyes clouded. She's made her choice. But protect my grandchildren, Dominic. They're all that will be left of me soon. As Dominic left the restaurant, he made 2 calls. The first was to his security chief, a former intelligence operative named Wesley Palmer. The second was to accept the wedding invitation. The game was changing, but the outcome never would. Dominic Frost didn't lose. Chapter 3. Wolves in Fine Clothing. The day of the wedding arrived with picture-perfect weather, warm sunshine kissing the manicured grounds of Whitebridge Country Club. Dominic adjusted his charcoal Brioni suit in the mirror, watching as Leo struggled with his tie behind him. Here, Dominic said, turning to help his son. The Windsor knot projects confidence. Leo studied his father's movements carefully. Why are we really going today, Dad? Dominic met his son's eyes in the mirror. Because sometimes you need to be in the room where decisions are made. Like in that musical Audrey likes. Leo asked. Something like that. Dominic smiled slightly. Stay close to me today. Watch everything, but say very little. They collected Audrey, stunning in a sapphire dress that highlighted her resemblance to a younger Vivian, and arrived at the venue precisely when the invitation specified. No earlier, no later. Dominic was meticulous about never appearing eager. Mr. Frost. Ryland Astor's smooth voice cut through the ambient chatter as they entered the reception area. How generous of you to come. Vivian wasn't sure you'd have the stomach for it. Dominic turned to find his soon-to-be ex-wife's fiancé standing there, golden-haired and tanned in a white tuxedo that screamed new money. Behind him stood a cluster of Vivian's relatives, watching the exchange with poorly disguised anticipation. Astor, Dominic replied, voice neutral. I never miss an important business opportunity. Ryland's smile faltered slightly. This is a wedding, not a business transaction. Isn't it both for you? Dominic's gaze was steady. Congratulations, by the way. 3rd time's the charm, I hear. A flash of alarm crossed Ryland's face before his composure returned. I think you're mistaken. Vivian is my first wife. Of course. My error. Dominic nodded to his children. We should find our seats. As they moved away, Ryland called after them. We've placed you with family, Dominic. Vivian thought it would be appropriate. The ceremony itself was predictably lavish. String quartet, imported flowers, handwritten vows that made Dominic notice how Vivian couldn't quite meet Ryland's eyes during her promises of eternal fidelity. Throughout, Dominic sat still and attentive, the model of decorum, while mentally cataloging every person in attendance, particularly the three men seated at different points in the venue whose attentive gazes suggested they weren't merely wedding guests. At the reception, Dominic found himself and his children seated at a table with Vivian's brother Nolan Hargrove and several cousins who had never approved of Vivian marrying outside their social circle. "Surprised you showed your face, Frost," Nolan said, already 3 drinks in despite the early hour. "Most men would have too much pride." "Pride is a luxury for those who can afford it," Dominic replied evenly. "Philosophy from the discarded husband," one of the cousins snickered. "How enlightened." Dominic merely sipped his water. He didn't drink alcohol at events where clarity was essential. The reception progressed with speeches, champagne, and increasingly obvious hostility directed toward Dominic. As the dance floor filled, Vivian's entire family seemed to converge on their table. Led by a visibly intoxicated Nolan, they formed a loose circle around Dominic and the children. "How pathetic to watch another man claim your family," Nolan proclaimed loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Tell us, Dominic, how does it feel to be so thoroughly replaced?" The room erupted in laughter, Ryland's distinct chuckle audible above the rest. Dominic remained seated, his expression unchanged. "Dad," Leo whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. "We need to leave now. Something's wrong." Dominic looked into his son's eyes, alert, anxious, perceptive, and gave an almost imperceptible nod. He stood smoothly, placing a protective hand on Leo's shoulder and motioning for Audrey to follow. "Leaving so soon?" Nolan taunted. "The fireworks are just about to start." "Indeed they are," Dominic replied quietly, guiding his children toward the exit. They had just reached the lobby when the first scream pierced the air, followed by a crash and more screams. Dominic calmly directed his children to a seating area away from the commotion. "Stay here," he instructed. "Do not move until I return." He walked back to the reception hall entrance just as Ryland Astor came bursting through the doors, his white tuxedo spattered with red wine, his face contorted with rage. Behind him, uniformed police officers were entering through the terrace doors. "You," Ryland snarled when he spotted Dominic. "You did this." "Did what exactly?" Dominic asked. "Don't play innocent, you calculating bastard. They're arresting me at my own wedding." Dominic arched an eyebrow. "For which offense? Bigamy, fraud, or identity theft? You have quite the resume, Richard Altman. Or do you prefer Ryan Austin? So many aliases, it's hard to keep track." Ryland lunged forward, but was restrained by 2 officers who had followed him into the lobby. "Ryland Astor, you're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and violation of probation," one officer announced. "You have the right to remain silent." As Ryland was led away, Vivian appeared in the doorway, her wedding gown stained with the same wine that marked Ryland's suit, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't do anything," Dominic replied truthfully. "Your father, however, made some calls before he died last week. It seems his final act was ensuring his daughter wouldn't be victimized." "You knew," she accused. "You knew and you let this happen." "I knew," Dominic acknowledged. "And yes, I could have warned you. But then, you never did value my input, did you?" He turned away from her, returning to his children. Leo was watching him with a mixture of awe and wariness. "How did you know something would happen?" Leo asked as they walked to the car. "I didn't know what would happen," Dominic corrected. "But I calculated the probabilities. In this case, the timing aligned perfectly." "Will Mom be okay?" Audrey asked, her earlier defiance replaced by confusion. "Your mother will survive," Dominic assured her. "She always does." As they drove away from Whitebridge, Leo studied his father's profile. "This isn't over, is it?" Dominic's lips curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. "No, Leo. This isn't over. It's barely begun." Chapter 4, Aftershocks. The aftermath of what the Boston Herald dubbed the Wedding Crasher scandal reverberated through elite social circles like a seismic event. Dominic observed it all with clinical detachment, like a scientist monitoring an experiment. Ryland Astor, revealed to be Richard Altman, a confidence man with outstanding warrants in 3 states, remained in custody awaiting trial. denied bail due to his history of disappearing acts. Vivian, humiliated but defiant, retreated to the Hargrove family's summer house on Cape Cod. She'd called the children daily at first, her voice brittle with forced cheerfulness, never once mentioning Dominic or the wedding disaster. After 2 weeks, the calls became less frequent. "Did you know Mom mortgaged her house?" Audrey asked one evening as they ate dinner in the minimalist dining room of Dominic's penthouse. Since the wedding incident, she had been spending more time with her father, her previous hostility replaced by cautious respect. Dominic set down his fork. "How did you learn this?" "She called today asking if I still had the diamond earrings she gave me for my 13th birthday. Said they were family heirlooms and she needed them back temporarily." Audrey pushed her quinoa around the plate. When I asked why, she said something about liquid assets and temporary financial restructuring. Leo, always quiet but missing nothing, looked up. "She's broke, isn't she?" "Your mother made investments based on promises that didn't materialize," Dominic explained carefully. "Her financial advisor should have cautioned her against placing all her assets with Ryland." "But you knew," Audrey said, not accusingly but with dawning understanding. "You knew and you didn't stop her." "I offered advice. She chose not to take it." Dominic's tone was matter of fact. People must live with the consequences of their decisions. Later that night, as Dominic reviewed security camera footage from his properties, a nightly ritual, his private line rang. The number was blocked, but few people had this number. Frost speaking. "They released him." Vivian's voice was taut with fear. "Ryland's out on bail. Someone paid it. Someone with influence." Dominic leaned back in his chair, processing this unexpected development. "Where are you?" "The Cape House." "I'm alone. The staff left yesterday. I couldn't make payroll." "And you're calling me because?" A bitter laugh came through the line. "Because despite everything, you're the only person I know who isn't afraid of him." "He's been calling, Dominic. Threatening messages. He blames me for everything. Says I must have known about the police." "Did you?" "Of course not. Do you think I'd have gone through with the wedding if I had?" Her voice broke. "I know you hate me, but please, the kids need their mother alive." Dominic checked his watch. "Stay where you are. Lock the doors, activate the security system. I'll make some calls." He hung up before she could respond and immediately dialed Wesley Palmer. "There's been a development. Astor's out. Find out who posted bail and why. Then get a security detail to the Hargrove Cape property." Within 30 minutes, Wesley reported back. Bail was posted by Stanford Montgomery, Boston real estate developer, relatively new player. Connection to Astor? Former business partner in Seattle. Both were implicated in a development scheme that went south, but Montgomery avoided charges by testifying against Astor. So why bail out the man he previously betrayed? Dominic mused. "That's where it gets interesting," Wesley continued. "Montgomery just acquired 3 properties adjacent to your downtown development. The timing is suspicious." Dominic processed this information silently. Someone was making moves against him, using Astor as a pawn. The game was expanding beyond Vivian and her ill-fated marriage. "Increase security at all properties and for the children," Dominic instructed. "And get me everything on Montgomery." The next morning, Dominic received a call from the security team he'd sent to Cape Cod. "Mr. Frost, we arrived at the Hargrove property as instructed, but the house was empty. Signs of hasty departure, but no evidence of struggle or forced entry. Ms. Hargrove appears to have left voluntarily approximately 2 hours before our arrival." Dominic frowned. "Check transportation, rental cars, ride services, local taxis." An hour later, the security team confirmed that Vivian had taken a taxi to a private airfield where a charter jet had been waiting. The flight plan indicated a destination in the Caribbean, St. Lucia. That evening, as Dominic explained to the children that their mother had decided to take some time away, his secure tablet pinged with an alert. Someone had attempted to access Leo's trust fund using Vivian's outdated authorization codes. "Dad, is Mom in trouble?" Leo asked, his perceptive eyes searching his father's face. "Your mother is making choices," Dominic replied carefully. "Some of them are unwise. Are you going to help her?" Audrey's question carried an undercurrent of accusation. Dominic considered his daughter thoughtfully. "I'm going to do what's necessary to protect this family. Sometimes that means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Dominic received a video call from an unknown number. When he accepted it, Ryland Astor's face filled the screen, his golden looks now hardened by the harsh lighting wherever he was calling from. "Evening, Frost," Ryland said with a tight smile. "Surprised?" "Not particularly," Dominic replied. "Though I am curious about your new benefactor." A flicker of surprise crossed Ryland's face before he regained his composure. "Always 3 steps ahead, aren't you? That's why I wanted to chat. We have a mutual interest now." "I doubt that very much." "Vivian," Ryland said simply. "She took something that belongs to me before she disappeared. Something valuable. Montgomery wants it too. It's why he posted my bail. And this concerns me how." Ryland leaned closer to the camera. "Because when Montgomery doesn't get what he wants from me, he'll come after you and those kids. The man doesn't distinguish between targets once he's committed." "You seem concerned for our welfare," Dominic observed dryly. "I'm concerned for myself," Ryland admitted. "But I'm offering a truce. Help me find Vivian and what she took, and I'll give you Montgomery. All his operations, his connections, his plans for your properties. A compelling offer from a proven liar." Ryland's facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine fear. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Frost. Montgomery isn't like us. He doesn't play by any rules. The only reason I'm not dead is because he thinks I can lead him to Vivian. And can you? With your resources?" "Absolutely." Dominic studied the man who had tried to steal his wife, his children's inheritance, and his business connections. "I'll consider your proposal." "Don't take too long," Ryland warned. "Montgomery's patience isn't infinite." After ending the call, Dominic sat motionless in his darkened office, recalibrating his assessment of the situation. What had begun as a simple case of infidelity and divorce had evolved into something more complex, with new players and higher stakes. He opened his laptop and typed a series of commands, accessing a tracking system he'd had installed years ago, a precaution Vivian never knew about. Her location appeared as a blinking dot, not in St. Lucia as the flight plan had indicated, but in Montreal, Canada. "Always 3 steps ahead," Dominic murmured to himself, reaching for his phone. Chapter 5, The Gambit. Montreal in early summer was vibrant with festivals and outdoor cafes, but Dominic had no interest in the city's charms as his private jet touched down. Wesley Palmer waited on the tarmac with a black Suburban, his expression grim. "She's still at the hotel," Wesley reported as they drove toward downtown. "Checked in under Victoria Harrison 3 days ago. Hasn't left the building since." "And her visitor?" "Arrived yesterday evening. Stanford Montgomery himself, not a proxy. They've ordered room service twice, no outgoing calls." Dominic absorbed this information silently. The fact that Montgomery had come personally suggested the stakes were even higher than Ryland had indicated. "The children are secure?" he asked. Wesley nodded. "Safe house in Vermont, as instructed. Miss Thorne is with them." Meredith Thorne was the children's longtime nanny, one of the few people Dominic trusted implicitly. Their vehicle pulled up to a discreet entrance of the Hotel St. Jacques, where the manager was waiting to escort them through a service corridor. Years of cultivating relationships in the hospitality industry ensured Dominic's privacy in situations like this. "They're in the Belmont suite," the manager whispered as they entered a service elevator. "Mr. Montgomery ordered champagne 30 minutes ago." The waiter reported they were celebrating something. The manager let them into a vacant room adjacent to the Belmont suite. Once alone, Wesley unpacked surveillance equipment and quickly set it up, providing audio and thermal imaging of the neighboring suite. "Told you he would pay." Montgomery's voice came through clearly. "Frost is many things, but he wouldn't risk his precious reputation or his children's safety." "You don't know him like I do," Vivian's voice replied, slurred slightly from alcohol. "Dominic doesn't negotiate. He dictates terms. Everyone negotiates when the stakes are high enough. 20 million is nothing to him, but everything to us right now." Dominic's expression remained impassive as he listened to his ex-wife and her new associate discussing their extortion plan. "And if he refuses?" Vivian asked. "Then we move to Plan B. The children." "No." Vivian's response was immediate. "That wasn't part of our agreement. The trust funds, yes, but not the children themselves." Montgomery's laugh was cold. "You surrendered your right to terms when you lost the flash drive. Now we improvise." Dominic had heard enough. He nodded to Wesley, who disassembled the equipment with practiced efficiency. "Options?" Wesley asked as they exited the building through the same service entrance. Return to Boston immediately, Dominic instructed. Alert our contact at the Financial Crimes Division. I want all my resources focused on Stanford Montgomery by morning. Back on the jet, Dominic placed a call to Ryland Astor. Did you find her? Ryland asked without preamble. She found Montgomery, Dominic replied. Or he found her. They're planning to use my children as leverage. The line went silent for a moment. That wasn't the plan, Ryland finally said, his voice tight. Was it not? Dominic's tone was dangerous. Because threatening my children seems remarkably consistent with the kind of operation you'd run, Astor. I'm many things, Frost, but I don't target children. That's Montgomery's style, not mine. You brought him into our lives. And I'm trying to get him out of them, Ryland insisted. Look, I was straight with you about what Vivian took, data that could implicate Montgomery in serious criminal activity. That's all he wants. What exactly is on this flash drive? Ryland hesitated. Financial records. Offshore accounts. Names of officials on Montgomery's payroll. I compiled it as insurance, but Vivian found it the night before the wedding. She must have thought it would be valuable leverage. And now Montgomery thinks I have it, Dominic concluded. Or that you can get it from her. Dominic considered his next move carefully. I need you to meet with Montgomery. Tell him you've convinced me to cooperate, that I'll provide access to the children's trust funds in exchange for assurances of their safety. He won't believe it, Ryland objected. He knows your reputation. Then enhance my reputation. Tell him I'll do anything to protect my children, even surrender financial control. Make it believable, Astor. Your life depends on it, as much as theirs. After ending the call, Dominic contacted his legal team, setting in motion a complex series of financial maneuvers. By the time his plane landed in Boston, 8 shell corporations had been established, each containing a portion of what appeared to be the children's trust funds but were, in fact, carefully constructed financial traps. The following morning, Dominic received confirmation that Ryland had met with Montgomery and apparently convinced him of Dominic's cooperation. A meeting was set for that evening at Montgomery's recently acquired property overlooking Boston Harbor. He'll have security, Wesley warned as they reviewed the building plans. So will we, Dominic replied, studying the blueprints. But this isn't about physical confrontation. It's about positioning. At precisely 8 p.m., Dominic arrived alone at Montgomery's building, a gleaming glass tower still under construction. He was escorted to the penthouse, which was furnished but clearly not yet lived in. Montgomery stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette outlined against the harbor lights. Vivian sat on a white leather sofa, her posture rigid. Dominic, she said, her voice a mixture of defiance and fear. You actually came. I'm full of surprises, he replied evenly, before turning to Montgomery. Let's dispense with pleasantries. You want the flash drive. Montgomery, tall, silver-haired, with the physique of a man who paid others to maintain his body, smiled thinly. Actually, I've already secured what was on the drive. Your ex-wife was quite cooperative once she understood the stakes. Dominic's expression didn't change. Then what am I doing here? Insurance, Montgomery replied. Ryland seems to think you might have made copies. I need to be certain all traces of that data are eliminated. And my children's trust funds. Consider it compensation for my inconvenience. Montgomery crossed to a desk and handed Dominic a tablet. Transfer authorization to these accounts. Once verified, we can all move on with our lives. Dominic took the tablet, studying the account details. And I have your word my family will be left alone? You have my disinterest, Montgomery corrected. Once this transaction is complete, you and your children become irrelevant to me. Dominic nodded once and began the transfer process, his fingers moving deliberately across the screen. When he finished, he handed the tablet back to Montgomery. It's done. Montgomery checked the screen, satisfaction spreading across his features as he verified the transfers. Pleasure doing business with you, Frost. Vivian spoke so highly of your intelligence. I'm almost disappointed you capitulated so easily. I'm a father first, Dominic said simply. Some things transcend business. As he turned to leave, Vivian caught his arm. Dominic, Save it, he cut her off. Whatever you're about to say, I'm not interested. The children will remain with me, he finished firmly. You've forfeited any claim to them. Montgomery chuckled from behind them. Such drama. Perhaps you should have remained married. You make a compelling pair. Dominic ignored him, fixing Vivian with a final look before walking out. In the elevator descending to the lobby, he removed a small device from his pocket and pressed a sequence of buttons. Outside, as his car pulled away from the building, he called Wesley. Initiate protocols 4 through 7 and contact our friend at the FBI. Wesley's response was immediate. Already done. They're moving in now. Dominic allowed himself the smallest smile as he watched the city lights blur past his window. The trap was set, the players positioned exactly where he wanted them. Now he simply had to wait for the cascade of consequences to begin. Chapter 6. Hidden Currents. 3 days after his meeting with Montgomery, Dominic sat in his home office monitoring a private news aggregator on his tablet. The headlines were rolling in exactly as anticipated. Tech mogul Stanford Montgomery arrested in massive fraud investigation. Federal agents raid properties linked to Montgomery Ventures. Offshore accounts frozen as international financial crimes probe widens. His secure phone buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. Your ex-wife has been detained for questioning. Cooperating fully. B was Bradley Marshall, an FBI financial crimes investigator who had been cultivating for years. The relationship was mutually beneficial. Dominic provided intelligence on questionable business practices in Boston's development community, and Marshall ensured that Frost enterprises were never caught in the wide nets occasionally cast by federal investigators. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Leo entered, his small face serious as always. The news says Mom's been arrested, he said without preamble. Dominic set his tablet aside. Not arrested. Detained for questioning. There's a difference. But she did something wrong. It wasn't a question. She made choices that had consequences, Dominic clarified, gesturing for Leo to sit. Your mother was trying to secure her financial future after some unwise decisions. Leo studied his father with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. By stealing from us. By attempting to access resources she no longer had legal claim to, Dominic corrected gently. He had never lied to his children, but he measured truth carefully, especially with Leo who absorbed everything like a sponge. Will she go to jail? Dominic considered his answer. That depends on how useful her cooperation proves to be. The authorities are more interested in Montgomery than in your mother. And Mr. Astor? Mr. Astor has disappeared, Dominic said, which was technically true. What he didn't mention was that Ryland had disappeared with the assistance of Dominic's security team, who had escorted him to a private airfield with a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country and a new identity, payment for his role in the trap that had ensnared Montgomery. Dominic had no illusions about Ryland's character, but he understood the value of keeping certain pieces on the board, especially when they could be controlled. Ryland alive but indebted was more useful than Ryland dead or imprisoned. Can I go see Mom? Leo asked. The question surprised Dominic. Do you want to? Leo considered this seriously. Not really, but Audrey might. Dominic nodded, appreciating his son's thoughtfulness. I'll speak with Audrey. If she wishes to see your mother, arrangements can be made. After Leo left, Dominic returned to his monitoring. The financial trap he had constructed for Montgomery was working perfectly. When Montgomery had attempted to access the trust fund transfers, he triggered sophisticated tracking algorithms that not only traced his existing financial networks, but implanted specialized markers in his systems. These markers had allowed federal investigators to access encrypted data that Montgomery believed was secure. What Montgomery hadn't realized was that the flash drive Vivian stole had been a plant, one of many contingencies Dominic had established once he became aware of Ryland's connection to Montgomery months earlier. The data on it was real enough to be damaging but incomplete enough to require Montgomery to access his hidden servers for verification, creating digital breadcrumbs for authorities to follow. His private line rang. Audrey, calling from her art class downtown. Is it true? She demanded without greeting. About Mom. Some of it, Dominic replied calmly. Where are you getting your information? It's all over TikTok. Someone filmed her being escorted from that hotel in Montreal by federal agents. People are saying she was involved in some huge money laundering scheme. Dominic made a mental note to have Wesley locate and possibly contain that footage. Your mother was in the wrong place with the wrong people. She's cooperating with authorities. A long silence followed. Did you know this would happen? Audrey finally asked, her voice smaller. I knew there would be consequences, Dominic answered truthfully. The specifics were dependent on choices others made. That's not a real answer, Dad. It's the only one I have right now, he said. Would you like to see her? I can arrange a visit if that's what you want. Another pause. No, Audrey decided. Not yet. Maybe later, when things are clearer. After ending the call, Dominic reviewed the latest intelligence from his network. Montgomery's arrest had created a power vacuum in certain development circles, a vacuum Dominic was already positioning to fill. 3 of the properties Montgomery had recently acquired would soon be available at distressed prices, and Dominic had already instructed his acquisition team to prepare bids. That evening, as he sat with his children at dinner, Dominic felt a rare moment of contentment. The threats to his family had been neutralized, his business interests were expanding, and most importantly, Audrey and Leo were safe under his roof, gradually healing from their mother's betrayal. I was thinking, he said casually, that we might take a trip soon. Perhaps to the ranch in Wyoming for a few weeks. The 3 of us. Audrey looked up from her plate, surprised. What about work? You never take that much time off. Some things are more important than work, Dominic replied, meeting her eyes. Family being foremost among them. Leo, quiet as always, simply nodded with understanding beyond his years. Later that night, as Dominic performed his security checks before bed, his tablet alerted him to an incoming video call from Vivian. He hesitated before accepting it. She looked exhausted, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. They're releasing me tomorrow, she said without preamble. Immunity deal in exchange for testimony against Montgomery. Congratulations, Dominic replied neutrally. Don't. Her voice hardened. You orchestrated all of this. Somehow, you knew what would happen and you positioned everything perfectly. Just like always. You give me too much credit. No, I didn't give you enough credit. That was always my mistake. She pushed her hair back from her face. I'm leaving Boston. Starting over somewhere else. The children will stay with you, she said, a crack in her composure revealing genuine pain. I'm in no position to care for them right now. And they're better off with you. I see that now. Dominic studied her face, searching for manipulation, but finding only resignation. Where will you go? My cousin has a place in Arizona. I thought I'd start there, figure things out. She hesitated. I won't contest the custody arrangement. I'll take whatever visitation you think is appropriate. I'll have my attorney draw up the paperwork, Dominic said, businesslike. The children's well-being will be the primary consideration. Vivian nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Tell them I love them, even if I've been terrible at showing it. After the call ended, Dominic sat motionless in the darkness of his study. Phase 1 of his plan had concluded more successfully than anticipated. Vivian neutralized without jail time that would further traumatize the children. Montgomery removed as a threat. Ryland dispatched to a remote corner of the world where he could do no further harm. But Dominic Frost had never been one to celebrate preliminary victories. The true endgame was still to come, the complete reconsolidation of his power and the final lesson for those who had dared to threaten what was his. He opened his laptop and began typing instructions for the next phase. Chapter 7, Recalibration. The Wyoming ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of pristine wilderness, bordered by mountains on one side and a crystal-clear lake on the other. Dominic had purchased it 5 years earlier as both investment and sanctuary, a place where the constant demands of Boston could be temporarily silenced. For 3 weeks, he devoted himself entirely to Leo and Audrey. They rode horses along mountain trails, fished in the lake, and spent evenings around a fire pit under stars that were invisible from their city home. Dominic observed subtle changes in both children, Leo becoming more verbally expressive, Audrey's defensive edges softening. On their final night at the ranch, as the children slept in their rooms, Dominic sat on the main cabin's porch with his satellite phone, reviewing updates from Wesley. Montgomery's trial date is set for November, Wesley reported. His legal team is struggling since the government froze most of his assets. 3 of his key associates have accepted plea deals. And Vivian, settled in Sedona, working at an art gallery owned by her cousin. Regular video calls with the children as arranged. Dominic nodded, though Wesley couldn't see him. The properties? Acquisition complete. Renovation plans approved by the city council. Construction begins next month. And our special project? Wesley's voice lowered slightly. Phase 1 complete. The accounts have been established. The evidence trail is in place. Awaiting your instruction to proceed with Phase 2. Hold until we return to Boston, Dominic decided. Has there been any communication from our friend overseas? One encrypted message 3 days ago. He's established himself in the new location. No complications reported. After ending the call, Dominic remained on the porch, watching the moon's reflection on the lake's surface. The peace of this place always provided clarity, allowing him to refine his strategies away from the noise of the city. His primary objectives had been achieved. His children were safe, his business interests secure, the immediate threats eliminated. But Dominic had learned long ago that true security came not just from neutralizing current enemies, but from ensuring that potential threats understood the consequences of challenging him. Montgomery would face justice through legal channels, his empire dismantled piece by piece. Vivian had been allowed to retreat with minimal damage, a concession made for the children's sake rather than hers. But the final piece of Dominic's strategy involved Ryland Astor, the man who had attempted to insert himself into Dominic's family, to manipulate his children's mother, to access wealth he hadn't earned. For that, a more personal reckoning was required. The next morning, as they prepared to return to Boston, Audrey approached Dominic as he packed his laptop. "Dad, I've been thinking," she began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "About Mom." Dominic gave her his full attention. "What about her? I want to see her. Not right away, but soon. Maybe during winter break." "If that's what you want, arrangements can be made," Dominic replied carefully. "You wouldn't be angry?" Dominic considered his daughter thoughtfully. "Audrey, your relationship with your mother is separate from my history with her. I would never stand between you and whatever connection you wish to maintain with her." "But you don't forgive her," Audrey observed. "Forgiveness isn't part of my nature," Dominic acknowledged. "But that's my limitation, not yours." Audrey studied him with an expression that reminded him painfully of her mother in younger days, before ambition and discontent had hardened her. "Do you forgive anyone, Dad?" "I move forward," he answered honestly. "Forgiveness implies a willingness to restore trust. I prefer to learn from experiences and adjust accordingly." Later, as their private jet climbed into the clear Wyoming sky, Leo sat beside his father while Audrey napped across the cabin. "We're going back to the real world now, aren't we?" Leo asked quietly. Dominic looked at his son. "What do you mean? Here, you were just..." "Dad, back in Boston, you're Mr. Frost again. The one everyone's afraid of." The observation was surprisingly astute. "Does it bother you that people fear me?" Leo considered this seriously. "No, it keeps us safe. But I wonder if it makes you lonely." Dominic had never thought of his existence in terms of loneliness. Power, control, strategy, these were the frameworks that defined his world. Yet something in Leo's innocent question penetrated those carefully constructed barriers. "I have you and Audrey," he said finally. "That's all the connection I need." Leo nodded, seemingly satisfied, and returned to the book he'd been reading. Dominic turned to the window, watching clouds pass beneath them, his mind already transitioning back to the calculating precision that awaited in Boston. Upon their return, Dominic immersed himself in work, finalizing the acquisition of Montgomery's former properties and restructuring several subsidiary companies. 2 weeks after their return, he received an alert that a familiar digital signature had been detected attempting to access one of his dummy servers, Ryland Astor, testing the waters from his new location. Dominic immediately contacted Wesley. Initiate Phase 2. The machinery Dominic had set in motion began to turn with ruthless efficiency. Offshore accounts established in Ryland's new name received substantial transfers from untraceable sources. Tax authorities in his new home country were anonymously notified of suspicious financial activity. Digital breadcrumbs suggesting connections to international criminal organizations were carefully planted in systems Ryland accessed regularly. Simultaneously, in Boston, a series of sealed legal filings were submitted to federal prosecutors, linking Ryland Astor to financial crimes that predated his involvement with Vivian or Montgomery. These filings included documentation that appeared to have come from Ryland himself, supposedly in exchange for immunity, documentation that implicated several powerful figures in Boston's business community, all of whom had opposed Dominic's ventures at one time or another. By the end of September, the trap was complete. Ryland Astor, now living under the name Michael Pearson in a coastal town in Belize, found himself targeted by local authorities, international financial investigators, and most dangerously, by individuals connected to the criminal organizations he had unknowingly been linked to. When Ryland's desperate message finally came through on the secure channel Dominic had provided, it was exactly what he had anticipated. They're closing in from all sides. Need extraction immediately. We'll provide anything required in exchange for safe passage. Dominic's response was simple. Call this number. One-time use. When Ryland called the provided number, Dominic answered personally. I should have known, Ryland said, his voice tight with fear and anger. This was your endgame all along. Did you expect something else? Dominic asked calmly. After you attempted to dismantle my family, I helped you with Montgomery. That counted for nothing. It counted for the comfortable months you've enjoyed in Belize, Dominic replied. Now the bill comes due. They'll kill me, Frost. The people you've connected me to, they don't ask questions first. That sounds like a personal problem. Ryland's desperation was palpable through the connection. What do you want? There must be something I can offer. There is one thing, Dominic acknowledged. A complete confession. All your operations, all your victims before Vivian. Names, dates, amounts. Everything authenticated and notarized. And then you'll help me disappear? For real this time. Then we'll discuss next steps, Dominic said neutrally. 24 hours later, Wesley delivered a comprehensive digital dossier containing Ryland's complete confession, recorded, transcribed, and authenticated by a lawyer in Belize who was on Dominic's payroll. The document detailed dozens of schemes spanning more than a decade, wealthy women targeted, manipulated, and financially drained across multiple states. Dominic reviewed the material carefully before making 2 calls. The first was to his contact at the FBI, to whom he provided a redacted version of Ryland's confession. The second was to Ryland himself. It's done, Ryland said immediately. I've given you everything. When can I expect extraction? Check your email, Dominic instructed. Seconds passed as Ryland presumably accessed his account. What is this? A news article from tomorrow? International con man found dead in Belize. Is this some kind of sick joke? It's a courtesy, Dominic replied evenly. A preview of tomorrow's headline. I wanted you to understand that there was never going to be an extraction. You sealed your fate the moment you targeted my family. Frost, listen to me. Ryland's voice rose with panic. No, you listen. Dominic cut him off, his tone glacial. In approximately 30 minutes, individuals connected to the Morales cartel will arrive at your location. They believe you've stolen millions from their laundering operation, a belief supported by the transfers to your accounts and the documentation provided to their intermediaries. You can't do this, Ryland breathed. This isn't justice, it's murder. Its consequences, Dominic corrected. Goodbye, Ryland. He ended the call and turned to Wesley, who had been standing silently by the office door. Monitor the situation. Confirmation only, no direct involvement. Wesley nodded once and departed, leaving Dominic alone with the weight of his decision. He felt neither satisfaction nor remorse, only the cool certainty that this chapter was closing exactly as he had designed it. The final piece had been positioned. The board was clear. Chapter 8, Legacies. The first snow of winter dusted Boston in early December, transforming the city into a pristine landscape that concealed the grime beneath. Dominic stood at his office window, watching workers install the Frost Construction logo on the former Montgomery building across the street. The acquisition had been completed weeks earlier, the renovation accelerated to erase all traces of the previous owner. His intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice came through. Mr. Frost, Leo's school is on line 1. Something about an incident. Dominic frowned slightly. Put them through. The call was brief but concerning. Leo had been involved in an altercation with another student who had made comments about Vivian and the scandal surrounding her failed marriage. Though Leo wasn't physically injured, the school counselor was concerned about his emotional state and requested Dominic come immediately. When he arrived at the prestigious private academy, Dominic was escorted to the headmaster's office where Leo sat alone, his posture rigid, his expression closed. I'll give you a moment, the headmaster said diplomatically, leaving them alone. Dominic took the chair beside his son. Want to tell me what happened? Tyler Whitman said Mom was a gold digger who got what she deserved, Leo replied, his voice eerily controlled for a 10-year-old. He said our whole family was rotten. And your response? I told him he was repeating gossip without understanding the facts, Leo said. Just like his father does in those Wall Street articles. Dominic suppressed a smile. Sherman Whitman was a financial journalist known for sensationalized reports that often contained half-truths. And then he pushed me, so I pushed him back. Leo finally looked up at his father. I didn't lose control, Dad. I calculated the acceptable response. The phrase, one Dominic himself often used, caught him off guard. He studied his son with new awareness, recognizing something of himself in the boy's measured reaction. It was both gratifying and unsettling. The acceptable response, Dominic repeated carefully, would have been to walk away and report the incident to a teacher. Leo's eyes narrowed slightly. That's not what you would have done. The observation hung between them, uncomfortably accurate. Dominic had always prided himself on his controlled responses to provocations, but he had never walked away from a direct challenge, a trait that had served him well in business but might not be the healthiest legacy for his son. Perhaps, Dominic acknowledged, there are areas where my example is not the ideal one to follow. Later that evening, after assuring the headmaster that appropriate discussions would be had at home, Dominic sat with both children in the living room of their penthouse. Snow continued to fall outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a sense of isolation from the world below. I want to discuss something important with both of you, Dominic began. About legacy, what we inherit from our parents, and what we choose to carry forward. Audrey looked up from her tablet. Is this about Leo's fight? It's about choices, Dominic corrected. My father, your grandfather, built his company through intimidation and ruthlessness. I inherited both his methods and the consequences of his approach, respect mixed with fear, success shadowed by isolation. Both children watched him with unusual attention. Dominic rarely spoke of his father or his own upbringing. I've continued many of those patterns, he admitted. They've been effective in building and protecting what we have. But effectiveness isn't the only measure of value. You're saying Leo shouldn't have pushed that kid back, Audrey interpreted. I'm saying there are aspects of my approach to conflict that you might be better off not emulating, Dominic clarified. Calculated responses have their place in business negotiations. In personal relationships, they can create distance. Leo's perceptive gaze never wavered. Like with Mom. The question was direct, forcing Dominic to consider his response carefully. Your mother and I made choices that created irreparable fractures in our relationship. But those choices don't have to determine your relationships with either of us. You don't want us to be like you, Audrey said, not accusingly but with dawning understanding. I want you to take the strengths, the strategic thinking, the perseverance, the loyalty to family, without inheriting the limitations, Dominic explained. The inability to forgive, the tendency to view relationships as transactions, the isolation that comes from always maintaining control. It was perhaps the most vulnerable he had ever been with his children, acknowledging dimensions of himself he rarely examined. The conversation continued into the evening, evolving into a discussion about their upcoming visit to Vivian in Arizona during winter break. To Dominic's surprise, he found himself genuinely supportive of this connection, recognizing that his children needed a relationship with their mother that wasn't filtered through his own grievances. 2 days later, Dominic received notification that the final phase of his strategy regarding Ryland Astor had been completed. International authorities had officially confirmed Ryland's death in Belize, ruling it a homicide connected to organized crime. The case was considered closed, with no connection to Dominic or his operations. Simultaneously, the federal investigation into Stanford Montgomery had expanded to include several prominent Boston business figures implicated in Ryland's confession. The resulting power vacuum was rapidly being filled by Frost Enterprises, consolidating Dominic's position as the preeminent force in Boston's development community. That evening, as he reviewed the final reports, Dominic was interrupted by a call from a number he recognized as belonging to the secure phone he had provided to Vivian. Dominic, she said when he answered, her voice stronger than the last time they'd spoken. I wanted to thank you personally for arranging the children's visit. It means more than I can express. They're looking forward to it, he replied neutrally. I've been in therapy, she continued, trying to understand the choices I made, the damage I caused. I don't expect forgiveness. I know that's not who you are. But I want you to know I'm working to be someone our children can respect again. Dominic was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected vulnerability. That's commendable. There's something else, Vivian said, her her tone shifting slightly. I received a strange package yesterday. A file containing information about Ryland's death and its connection to certain financial transactions. Transactions that have your signature all over them, even if they can't be traced directly to you. Dominic's grip on the phone tightened imperceptibly. What do you intend to do with this information? Nothing, she replied simply. It's already been destroyed. Whatever Ryland was, whatever he did, I don't need those details haunting me. And the children don't need their father implicated in something so final. Why tell me it all? Dominic asked, genuinely curious. Because I wanted you to know that while I can't change what happened between us, I won't contribute to any further damage to this family. The children need at least one of us to prioritize healing over retribution. After the call ended, Dominic remained at his desk, turning this new development over in his mind. The file Vivian mentioned could only have come from one source, Ryland himself, a final contingency plan activated upon his death. It was a move Dominic should have anticipated but had not. More surprising was Vivian's response. The woman who had once aligned with Montgomery against him, who had attempted to access their children's trust funds, had chosen to protect him instead. It was a variable he hadn't accounted for in his calculations. For the first time in recent memory, Dominic found himself facing a feeling that resembled regret, not for the fate he had engineered for Ryland Astor, but for the absolute certainty with which he had judged Vivian incapable of change. As snow continued to fall outside his window, Dominic Frost confronted the possibility that his most fundamental limitation might not be his ruthlessness, but his unwillingness to recalibrate his assessment of people once they had disappointed him. It was a realization that changed nothing about his past actions, but perhaps cast a slightly different light on potential future ones. Chapter 9. Equilibrium. Spring arrived in Boston with characteristic unpredictability, warm sunshine interspersed with lingering cold snaps that kept the city in transitional limbo. Dominic found the weather oddly appropriate for his current state of mind, a period of recalibration and strategic adjustment. The quarterly board meeting of Frost Construction had concluded with unanimous approval of his expansion plans. The Montgomery properties had been fully integrated into the Frost portfolio, their values already appreciating under new management. The federal investigation into Montgomery's associates had cleared the field of several longtime competitors, leaving Dominic in an unprecedented position of market dominance. By any objective measure, his strategy had been flawlessly executed. The threats to his family and business had been eliminated. His children were thriving, Leo excelling academically while showing more social engagement, Audrey rediscovering her passion for art and planning to attend a prestigious summer program in Paris. Even Vivian had stabilized, maintaining appropriate boundaries and consistent communication with the children. Yet Dominic found himself dissatisfied in ways he couldn't immediately quantify. Success had always been measured in control, in the elimination of vulnerabilities. By those metrics, he had achieved complete victory. But Leo's question from months earlier lingered. Does it make you lonely? The thought was interrupted by his assistant announcing Wesley Palmer's arrival. Wesley entered carrying a secure tablet, his expression typically impassive. Final confirmation, Wesley reported, placing the tablet on Dominic's desk. All traces have been eliminated. The connection between the Morales cartel and Ryland's accounts has been purged from every system. Even if someone were looking, there would be nothing to find. Dominic nodded. And the other matter? Ms. Hargrove's security has been upgraded as requested. Discreet but comprehensive. She's unaware of the additional measures. After the revelation that Vivian had received and destroyed potentially damaging information about Ryland's death, Dominic had quietly arranged enhanced security for her Arizona residence. He told himself it was to protect the children's interests, to ensure their mother remained stable and safe, but he recognized the rationalization for what it was. Will there be anything else? Wesley asked. Dominic considered the man who had executed so many of his most sensitive operations over the years. Wesley Palmer had been a constant in his professional life, reliable, discreet, effective. Yet Dominic realized he knew almost nothing about the man himself. How long have you worked for me, Wesley? The question seemed to surprise Palmer. 11 years next month, sir. And before that, military intelligence. Then private sector security consulting. Dominic leaned back in his chair. Do you have family? A flicker of something, caution, perhaps, crossed Wesley's typically stoic features. A sister in Portland. Niece and nephew I see a few times a year. Take some time, Dominic said abruptly. 2 weeks, fully compensated. Visit your family. Wesley's eyebrows rose slightly. Is there a concern about my performance? Quite the opposite. Consider it recognition of your exceptional service. Dominic's tone made it clear the matter wasn't open for discussion. After Wesley departed, Dominic turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Boston spread below him, a landscape he had helped shape through decades of strategic acquisition and development. From this height, people were reduced to moving dots, buildings to geometric forms, a perspective that had always appealed to his preference for calculated detachment. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Frost, Leo's school is on line 1 again. Dominic felt a momentary tension. Put them through. Unlike the previous call months earlier, this one brought unexpected news. Leo had been selected to represent his grade in a prestigious mathematics competition. The teacher calling was effusive about Leo's abilities and, more surprisingly, his leadership in helping other students prepare for the preliminary rounds. He's showing remarkable collaborative skills, the teacher explained. Not just solving problems himself, but helping others understand the methodology. It's quite impressive for his age. After the call, Dominic sat with the information, feeling an unfamiliar sense of pride that went beyond Leo's academic achievement. His son was forging a path that incorporated Dominic's strategic thinking but paired it with an emotional intelligence Dominic himself had always considered unnecessary. That evening, as they celebrated Leo's selection with a special dinner, Audrey mentioned her recent video call with Vivian. "Mom's dating someone," she announced, watching her father carefully for his reaction. "Some artist guy who works at the gallery with her. She wanted us to know before we visit for spring break." Dominic nodded, unsurprised. "Your mother deserves happiness." Audrey's eyebrows shot up. "That's not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" Dominic asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know. Something cold and dismissive." Audrey shrugged. "You've been different lately. Less calculating," Leo suggested. "I was going to say robotic," Audrey smirked. "But calculating works too." Dominic absorbed this assessment with surprising equanimity. People adapt when circumstances require it. "Is that what happened?" Leo pressed. "Circumstances changed?" Dominic looked at his son, perceptive as always, seeking patterns and explanations. "Perhaps my calculations expanded to include variables I'd previously overlooked." Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Dominic received an unexpected call from his FBI contact, Bradley Marshall. "Thought you'd want to know," Marshall began without preamble. "Montgomery's attempting to negotiate a reduced sentence by offering information on, quote, the real power behind Boston's development community." "Meaning me," Dominic interpreted. "Precisely. He's claiming you orchestrated his downfall, that the evidence against him was manufactured." "And your response?" "That's why I'm calling," Marshall said. "Officially, we've declined his offer due to lack of corroborating evidence. Unofficially, his claims align with certain patterns my colleagues and I have observed over the years." Dominic absorbed this silently. "Don't misunderstand," Marshall continued. "No one's opening an investigation. Montgomery destroyed himself with well-documented criminal behavior. But I thought you should know, perceptions are shifting in certain quarters." "I appreciate the information," Dominic replied neutrally. "One more thing," Marshall added. "Montgomery had a visitor yesterday, his former attorney, Claire Donahue. She's been seen meeting with representatives from several development firms that have historically competed with Frost Construction." After ending the call, Dominic considered this new information with his usual methodical assessment. Claire Donahue was formidable, brilliant, connected, and one of the few people who might possess enough pieces to reconstruct the strategies Dominic had employed against Montgomery and, by extension, Ryland Astor. In the past, his response would have been immediate and decisive. Construct a counter-strategy, identify Donahue's vulnerabilities, neutralize the threat before it materialized. The machinery was still in place. Wesley and his team could begin the process with a single call. Instead, Dominic found himself reconsidering the pattern that had defined his professional life. The elimination of threats, the consolidation of power, the ruthless efficiency with which he removed obstacles, all had served him well, but at what cost? Leo's question about loneliness. Audrey's observation about his robotic nature, even Vivian's choice to destroy damaging information rather than use it against him suggested possibilities he had previously dismissed. The next morning, Dominic summoned his legal team to review all connections between Frost Construction and the properties formerly owned by Montgomery. Every transaction was examined for absolute legal compliance, every document scrutinized for potential vulnerabilities. By afternoon, he had initiated a restructuring of several key holdings, creating additional layers of insulation between himself and any actions that might be construed as manipulative of market forces. It wasn't retreat. Dominic Frost didn't retreat. It was strategic repositioning, an adjustment to changing conditions. If Claire Donahue and her associates were looking for evidence of impropriety, they would find only meticulously documented, legally sound business practices. That weekend, as he watched Leo and Audrey prepare for their spring break visit to Vivian, Dominic made a decision that surprised even himself. "I've been thinking," he said as they sorted through clothes to pack. "I might accompany you for the first day in Sedona, to ensure you're settled comfortably." Both children stared at him with undisguised shock. "You want to see Mom?" Audrey asked incredulously. "I want to make sure the security arrangements for your visit are adequate," Dominic clarified, though he recognized the rationalization even as he voiced it. "It seems most efficient to assess the situation personally." Leo's penetrating gaze suggested he understood more than Dominic was admitting. "Does Mom know about this plan?" "Not yet," Dominic acknowledged. "I'll speak with her this evening." The call to Vivian was brief, but surprisingly civil. After initial shocks similar to the children's, she agreed to the arrangement with cautious acceptance. "You'll stay at the resort in town," she specified. "Not at my house." "Of course," Dominic agreed. "This isn't an intrusion. Simply a practical measure for the children's security. And this has nothing to do with checking on my new relationship." Her tone was knowing. "Your personal life is your own," Dominic replied with uncharacteristic diplomacy. 3 days later, as their private jet descended towards Sedona's airport, Dominic found himself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation that might, in another person, be identified as nervousness. The carefully constructed separation between his past with Vivian and his present responsibilities as a parent was about to be bridged in ways he hadn't allowed before. Vivian was waiting at the small terminal, looking healthier than when he'd last seen her, her complexion warmed by the Arizona sun, her posture more relaxed. Beside her stood a tall man with silver-threaded dark hair, dressed casually in a way that would have been unthinkable in their Boston circles. The children rushed to her upon exiting the plane, embracing her with genuine affection that created a momentary tightness in Dominic's chest. He approached more slowly, nodding formally to Vivian and extending his hand to her companion. "Dominic Frost," he introduced himself. "Daniel Cormier," the man replied, his handshake firm. "I've heard a lot about you." "I imagine you have," Dominic acknowledged with unexpected humor. The initial awkwardness faded somewhat as they made arrangements for luggage and transportation. As agreed, Dominic would stay at the resort while the children spent the week at Vivian's home. The security measures he had arranged were discreet but comprehensive, a detail Vivian seemed to tacitly understand and accept without discussion. That evening, after getting the children settled, Dominic found himself sitting across from Vivian on the patio of a local restaurant recommended by Daniel, who had tactfully made himself scarce for this particular meeting. "He seems decent," Dominic observed, surprising himself with the genuine assessment. "He is," Vivian agreed. "Uncomplicated in ways that, well, in ways that neither of us ever were." They sat in silence for a moment, the red rock formations of Sedona glowing in the setting sun around them. "Why are you really here, Dominic?" Vivian finally asked. "The security explanation is plausible, but we both know you could have handled that remotely." Dominic considered the question with the same precision he applied to business problems. "Adaptation," he finally said. "The circumstances of our family have changed. My response is adjusting accordingly." "Always the strategist," Vivian murmured, though without the bitterness that would have colored such a comment in the past. "The children said you've been different lately, less absolute in your judgments." "I've been reevaluating certain assumptions," he allowed. "Like your assumption that I was irredeemable?" Her directness had always been one of her strengths, even when it was uncomfortable. "Perhaps," Dominic acknowledged. "Evidence suggests I may have, miscalculated certain variables. Vivian laughed softly. That might be the closest thing to an apology anyone has ever received from Dominic Frost. It's not an apology, he clarified. It's a reassessment. Of course it is. Her smile held knowing affection rather than mockery. You know what your problem always was, Dominic? You built systems so perfect that they left no room for human imperfection. Not in others, and especially not in yourself. The observation was uncomfortably perceptive, hitting closer to recent realizations than he would have expected from her. Systems provide structure and predictability, he replied, though with less conviction than he might have once expressed. They also isolate, Vivian countered. Look at Leo. He has your mind, your gift for strategy and analysis. But he's learning to connect it to emotional intelligence, to relationship building. He could be the best of both worlds if you let him. Their conversation continued as night fell, moving from the children to their respective new lives, finding an unexpected equilibrium that neither would have predicted possible a year earlier. They were not friends, too much history layered between them for that, but they had achieved something approaching mutual respect. As Dominic prepared to leave for his hotel, Vivian hesitated before speaking. The file that came after Ryland's death. I meant what I said about destroying it. But I want you to know I understood what I was looking at, what it represented. Dominic's expression remained carefully neutral. And I recognized that whatever you did, it wasn't just about revenge or control. It was about protection, permanent, absolute protection for the children, for their future. She met his eyes directly. I can't condone your methods, but I understand the intention behind them. I always did. Back at his hotel, Dominic stood on the balcony overlooking the dramatic landscape of Sedona. The red rocks stood sentinel in the darkness, ancient and unchanging despite the erosive forces constantly working upon them. He found the metaphor fitting for his current situation. His phone vibrated with an incoming message from Wesley. Donahue met with representatives from global partners today. Detailed surveillance available upon request. Dominic considered the message, weighing potential responses. Claire Donahue and her associates represented a potential threat to the empire he had built. Not an immediate one, but one that could develop if left unaddressed. The old Dominic Frost would have immediately authorized countermeasures, employed the full range of resources at his disposal to neutralize this emerging challenge. Instead, he typed a different response: maintain observation only. No intervention without direct authorization. Setting the phone aside, Dominic reflected on the changes of the past months. His core remained unchanged. He was still the calculated strategist who had built Frost Construction into a powerhouse, who had systematically dismantled threats to his family and interests. He would never be a man who forgave easily or who welcomed vulnerability as a strength. But perhaps, as Vivian had suggested, there was room in his carefully constructed systems for adjustment, for the incorporation of variables he had previously discounted. Perhaps ruthlessness and connection were not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary forces that, properly balanced, created a more sustainable form of power. As he prepared for bed, Dominic received a text from Leo. Thanks for coming with us, Dad. See you for breakfast tomorrow? The simple message carried more significance than its few words suggested. An acknowledgement of change, an invitation to continue the evolution that had begun in the aftermath of that wedding reception months earlier. Dominic typed his response, 8 a.m. Don't be late. Some things, after all, remain constant. Precision, expectations, standards that would not be compromised. But within that framework, perhaps there was room for something new. Not a complete transformation, but an expansion of possibilities. Dominic Frost would never be a man who forgave his betrayers or who surrendered his capacity for ruthlessness when circumstances demanded it. But he could, perhaps, be a man who recognized that different strategies were required for different objectives, and that the protection of his legacy might require more than the elimination of threats. It might require the capacity to evolve. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.